Hey, welcome to Stan the Energy Man on my lunch hour here at Think Tech Hawaii. Hey, first I want to start off by thanking Rachel James and her lovely daughter for hosting last week's show while I was busy camping out on the Big Island in the boonies. Totally out of touch by cell phone and everything else, which is the way to go, trust me. And apologize for not having a show the week before because I was actually on the mainland, invited by the Department of Energy to participate in a forum, the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, which is an international forum that looks at getting fuel cells into production and into common use in all countries around the world. In fact, the next meeting is in Korea this fall in November. But I was really excited to go. It was a one-day thing on the 20th of May, outstanding. But what was really exciting was the same things that we're challenged with here in Hawaii are the same things that people around the world are challenged with in terms of bringing hydrogen into the mainstream. So I was really excited to be there, and I'll try and share little tidbits throughout my next few shows on what we talked about. I'd like to start off though today talking about kind of going backwards, and I have a lot of discussions all the time. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a reporter from one of the local magazines about transportation and alternative fuel powered transportation in Hawaii and how we're going to move forward. As you know, we had Shem Lawler here on a show, and he told us about how our transportation grade here in Hawaii is kind of waning. We're in the D- range. We're not really getting very far. But I wanted to talk a little bit because it's a long road. So I have a picture that I want to throw up on the screen and show you folks and give you an example of where we started. Back in 100 years ago, when we started with transportation, we started with, most of the time, electric motors. And it wasn't until after we had gone through some steam engines and we finally settled into internal combustion engines that we kind of stayed with internal combustion engines. But, the horseless carriage, when it first made the transition, around the time of Edison and Nikola Tesla, electric motors were the choice. And the reason is they're very efficient, they were very powerful, they had a lot of torque, they were very effective. So what you're looking at on the screen, believe it or not, is the very first Porsche ever made by Mr. Porsche. And it was an electric vehicle. So here we are 100 years later, and we're still just kind of discovering electric vehicles. So how did we ever attach ourselves to internal combustion fuel engines? And the answer is energy storage. So a lot of what we're going to talk about in this first segment is energy storage as the challenge to our transportation sector. What we had over the last 100 years, even though we know that the electric motors are great, is we've had trouble storing the energy. So we went to fuels, liquid fuels, which are better energy carriers, easier to store, easier to fill, and you don't have to wait for hours to charge a battery up. And very efficient, very lightweight, easy to transport around. And whenever you're doing transportation, particularly aviation transportation, then you need to think about weight. So we chose fossil fuels and gasoline and diesel for their qualities that make them transportable and easy to store and easy to manufacture. And because back in that time frame, to be quite frank with you, we as a society across the globe were into colonizing other countries, and if you were a power, it was exert your power. If you were a big company, you exerted your monopoly. And things happened in big ways back in the middle of the 20th century, in the early 20th century, where we basically had big companies and big names, Fords and Hearst and you name it, Westinghouse, all the big folks started these huge companies, and the oil and internal combustion engine business took off. So electric vehicles kind of died because they didn't store energy well in the old batteries. Here we are 100 years later, we still have challenges with batteries. Tesla, the Elon Musk and the new Tesla are a testament, and I gotta hand him some credit. I don't know why it is, but it seems like everybody else that makes an electric vehicle thinks it needs to look like a dorky box with wheels on it. Tesla broke the code Elon Musk broke the code with Tesla and put a really beautifully designed car together that is electric powered, very powerful. If you've ever been on the road and driven in a Tesla or driven next to a Tesla, and challenge him to a race, you'll find out pretty quickly that he'll pull away from you very quickly. So why is it we're still kind of struggling with batteries and electric vehicles? And it gets back to storage. In fact, when we start talking about the grid and the challenges we're having with the grid and renewable energy, it gets back to storage. So the challenges that we're facing now have to do with energy storage, especially with renewables. So when we talk about trying to move transportation forward, we need to talk about all of the solutions that'll move transportation forward, not just battery power, but hybrid power and fuel cell hydrogen power. So let's talk a little bit about the hybrid piece. Everybody understands a plug-in electric vehicle. It's got batteries, you plug it in, you drive, batteries run down, you charge it up, you drive, and it's just a cycle like that. But not a lot of people understand what a hybrid vehicle really does. Well, internal combustion engines by themselves are not very efficient. They're in the 20 to 30% efficiency range. And within that range, that's their optimum range. You put them in a traffic situation where they're constantly accelerating and decelerating, and they're not efficient at all. In fact, they're terribly inefficient. You can get inefficiencies down into the single digits when you're in stop and go traffic and idling, and it's terrible. So what does a hybrid do that gets you better mileage when you're still using an internal combustion engine? And the reason that it gives you good mileage is it operates that internal combustion engine only at its optimum level. So what a hybrid vehicle does is it takes the best of the technology in electric drivetrain, including regenerative braking, and it matches it up with a smaller internal combustion engine whose only job in the world is to drive a generator. And it drives a generator at the most efficient level that it's designed to do as an internal combustion engine. And that's how come you can get 40 plus miles per gallon in a mid-sized car that normally would get in the mid 20 mile per gallon range if it was just a straight internal combustion engine. So hybrid vehicles are actually a great improvement and a great way to start making some headway on cleaner transportation sector. The interesting part is that it's now an electric vehicle. We're starting to make that transition back to an electric vehicle. And that's the exciting part. The answer I think we'll find across the board is that as we move into the future, we need to move towards electric vehicles. And those electric vehicles can be plug-in electric, they can be hybrid internal combustion electric, whether it's diesel or gas, and they can be hydrogen fuel cell electric, and maybe there'll be some other technologies that come along that take advantage of the electric vehicle. So let's move towards the next version of a hybrid, which is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Now, the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle uses gaseous hydrogen under pressure in a tank and provides hydrogen on one side of a catalyst and oxygen in the air from another side of the other side of the catalyst. When it recombines, it makes water and it gives you an electric current. And that electric current is sufficient enough to drive the motor and to charge the batteries. So we have now 3 varieties of electric motors that are driving our transportation sector, and we need to work on all 3 of them together to help improve our transportation across the board. Now the challenge is we haven't really broken the code just on batteries. Batteries are great, but they're heavy. And like I say, when you start to drive around heavyweight items, now that decreases your efficiency in your overall vehicle. In other words, you don't see a whole lot of big, huge trucks driving off of just batteries, because you'd have to put so many batteries in them to get those big, huge trucks moving that they wouldn't be able to carry much. They'd just be moving their batteries around. Same goes with the grid. When we have a lot of renewables on the grid, the electric company has to balance their grid, and they need a lot of energy storage when there's clouds that come over your PV array or the wind stops blowing on your wind farm. So what kind of storage do you want to use there? Would batteries work? And the answer is yes, batteries work pretty well. But how much battery is safe? How much battery is reasonable? How much battery makes sense from an economic standpoint? And there's been several studies across the national labs here that talk about when you get to 15 to 18% penetration, which is about where Hawaii is at with renewable energy, Batteries aren't the whole solution. You need other forms of energy storage. And those other forms can be flywheels, can be hydrogen, can be pumping water uphill when you have electricity, available surplus electricity, and then running the water back through turbines to make electricity later in the day when you need it and the sun's not out. Those kind of options are what we need to be looking at in the grid. And why do I bring this up in terms of transportation and electric vehicles? Well, I bring it up because here in Hawaii, we have a unique opportunity. We have an opportunity to help solve our grid challenges by making hydrogen when you have extra curtailed power, storing the hydrogen, and having that hydrogen available not only to be put back onto the grid where you need it, which is important. You're not pushing power from Kahe Power Plant to Mililani. You take the power off the photovoltaics in Mililani and you push it back into the grid from Mililani, so you're not pushing it through wires, which loses energy all the way. It's called dispatchable power. But that same hydrogen is now available for your vehicles. So you can actually help the transportation sector advance while you're solving your renewable energy challenges and your grid stabilization challenges with HECO or the electric grid. So we need to have a big strategic look at what we're doing with electricity and the grid and electricity and transportation. But it all comes back to electricity. Electricity is very efficient, very powerful, and it's one of those great energy sources that we use very efficiently nowadays, and that's what we should be focusing on. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit now, because I do like hydrogen, and we talked about how it can be a great solution, but one of the things that we're challenged with is hydrogen safety. Our office talks about it all the time, and we're constantly surprised that we have to keep repeating how safe hydrogen is, and so I just need to beat that drum. So we have a video that I'm gonna show. It's part of you've seen it on Think Tech before, but it starts off showing Paul Pontio on the Big Island giving a demonstration of his walk burner on the Big Island. And I'd like to let Paul take over from here and show you some safety of hydrogen.
Dispel some of the myths about hydrogen, because most people are afraid of hydrogen. Most people think it's the most explosive thing on the planet, and that if you have a small leak in a hydrogen system, then it's just destined to explode and burn the building down. Well, the reality is that since it's the lightest element in the universe, it's 14 times lighter than air. It goes up at 45 miles an hour when it's let loose. That's 66 feet a second. So think about it going 1001 and it's 6 stories away. It's gone. And because of that, it's very difficult to get a concentration that's flammable at the source of a leak unless you're right at the leak source. And what we do in the classroom is we do it by showing this. So you got a really audible major leak of hydrogen. It's blowing out right now like crazy. And most people would think if there's a spark, it's going to blow up. Well, it'll blow the flame out if I get close enough to it right now. It won't ignite until I get down closer to where it's concentrated enough. But as it's leaking out, it's hitting the ceiling of this building and it's going out that vent. So before I lit it, the hydrogen that had leaked out had already left the building. It's gone. It's moving really, really fast. So the other cool thing about hydrogen is that since there's no carbon in it, it's just purely hydrogen. And it's a little windy in here. But there's no radiant heat. And because of that, you can put your finger about 1/8 inch from the flame and there's no heat. It won't burn. But above right here, it's 500 degrees plus. It's very hot. And if you come here, you can actually put your hands over it, you can feel the humidity in the flame because it's making water vapor with the oxygen in the air. I'll turn it down a little bit. The other thing is the other big myth or misunderstanding, it's not a myth, is that hydrogen is invisible when it burns. Well, it is outside. So if we took this in the sunlight, you wouldn't see the flame. But
All right, so that's a quick clip of Paul showing us how his hydrogen walk burner works and how safe it is, and talking about how fast hydrogen goes up. If that video keeps rolling, what you see is we talk about, how if it moves up at 60, basically 60 feet per second, 45 miles an hour, it's 6 stories above you in 1 second. And in that time, it doesn't have enough time to really mix with air in what we call a homogeneous way to burn. So he has to literally turn the gas volume down and light the thing right at the source. Otherwise, he can't even get it to light. So hydrogen is really much safer than most people perceive. They've seen a lot of Hindenburg videos, they've heard a lot of horror stories about hydrogen, but most of them, unfortunately, aren't really all that accurate. And there are other forms of hydrogen with oxidizers in them that make hydrogen with an oxidizer very explosive. It turns into rocket fuel. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about stored hydrogen for vehicles. So you need to be able to differentiate between what we're doing in vehicles and all the other scary hydrogen stuff that's out there. So we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back and talking a little bit more about energy.
Aloha, everybody. My name is Mark Shklov. I'd like you to join me for my program, Law Across the Sea, on thinktechhawaii.com. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Chantal Seville, the host of The Savvy Chick Show. You can watch the show every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Honolulu time and enjoy how to be inspired and empowered. If you're a woman or girl, everyone is welcome, but it's really dedicated to you. And we look forward to seeing you. You can also find us on thinktechhawaii.com. See you soon. Aloha.
Aloha, how you doing? Welcome to Hibachi Talk. Gordo the Texar here. We're here every Friday from 1 o'clock till about 1:45, and we talk tech with many, many great guests. So I got Andrew, the security guy, who helps me co-host, and I got Papi Chulo, who comes in once in a while to help us through the show. So please come join Hibachi Talk every Friday. Angus will be here too. So remember, like we say at the end of every show, how you doing?
So we have a lot of challenges here in Hawaii. I'm encouraged by where we're headed, and one of the things that's encouraged me is the way the legislature has started to warm up to renewable energy and transportation. And my guest next week is going to be Representative Chris Lee from the windward side. He's going to come on and talk, and he's one of our energy champions and the head of the energy committee in the House of Representatives in the state legislature. And one of the great things that happened this year for us is that the legislature approved some funding in the form of a bond to help us design the first hydrogen station for our fleet vehicles in the state of Hawaii. This is a huge step for us, and we're looking forward to working with Ford Fujikami from the State Department of Transportation and Dave Rodriguez over there to help design the first station and hopefully have it up and running in the next few years, because we have a plan to turn 9 of the buses that he's going to have running his rental car shuttle fleet into hydrogen fuel cell buses. So that was a real win in the legislature this year, and we're looking for some more wins next year, and I think we're well on our way. So there's some other things that are happening in the hydrogen world that I thought you'd be interested in. One of them, we got a video clip coming up, a real short one, a 2-minute video on what's going on in aviation. And we're going to run that clip, but I almost brought an article that showed up online too, where a guy designed a hydrogen fuel cell airplane. He's I think it was a Florida State University graduate and entered a NASA competition. And he literally designed a hydrogen-powered airplane that can carry 4 people and perform very much like a gas engine-powered airplane. Same range, 900 miles on one fill-up, and all the safety pieces are in there. Just amazing, but I'll save that for another show. So we're gonna run a quick video here on what Boeing's doing nowadays in the impressive world of what we call ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, with platforms that need to stay up in the air a long time, and hydrogen lets you do that.
When disaster happens, real-time information and the ability to communicate are critical to helping people in need. Introducing the Phantom Eye. It's an eye in the sky at 65,000 feet, where it's needed, when it's needed, above any place on Earth.
Phantom Eye is a hydrogen-powered unmanned air vehicle that really gives us global reach.
The Phantom Eye is a UAV that is built to gather and transmit information, cruising for days in the stratosphere, far above storms, turbulence, or commercial aircraft.
This would be a vehicle you could put up over a disaster area, or if all communications were lost, could basically come in and replace satellite communications.
The Phantom Eye offers immense flexibility. It can be used for emergency relief, search and rescue operations, port security, border monitoring, and scientific experiments.
On the military side, a lot of the work is geared towards intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance gathering.
To create this aircraft, Boeing developed an entirely new wing and propulsion system, both highly efficient.
The wing is one of the critical technologies. It's 150 feet long. When it's flying, it actually bows up some because of carrying the weight of the fuselage. Inside the fuselage are the two twin hydrogen fuel tanks. We bring hydrogen into the chamber with oxygen, and the combustion produces water. So it's about as green as it can get when it's flying.
The current experimental Phantom Eye can carry a 450-pound payload of cameras and other equipment. The actual production version will have an even bigger wing, 250 feet, and carry a 2,000-pound payload.
The demonstrator that we're building, it'll stay up for 4 days. Eventually, we envision the operational vehicle being a 10-day vehicle.
Once an unmanned airborne vehicle can stay aloft for 10 days, 3 or 4 of the aircraft could provide 24/7 coverage all year long above any point on the globe.
There's a whole host of new technologies being demonstrated, and this couldn't be pulled off without a team that's coming forward with the innovation and the solutions to bring this all together.
So there's another look at how hydrogen is being used in a different transportation sector, the aviation sector. Now, I think we're a long ways off from seeing 747 size airplanes using hydrogen fuel cells, but it's out there. And I think the only reason we're that far off is because the aviation community is going to take a long time to change away from fossil fuels, just because they have to invest so much money in their capital investment, in their infrastructure, and in their equipment, that they're not going to want to change from things that they've already kind of planned out for the next 10 or 15 years. Excuse me, but they are working on it. But the big point in that whole video is the safety piece. A lot of folks still, they don't get the safety of hydrogen, but it's nice to remind folks that in the aviation world, safety and weight are very paramount in the design of aviation assets, aircraft. And also submarines. The Navy's been using fuel cells in submarines, not for their hydrogen electrical propulsion and electric generation, but to generate oxygen for their crews when they're underwater. Because when you split water to get the hydrogen, your byproduct is oxygen, which is kind of convenient when you're in a submarine. And that technology's been out there for decades, and the Navy has worked with it for decades. Very safe, very good to use. So there's a lot going on in the aviation world, in the nautical world. We're looking at transportation constantly at HCAT and HTDC to find out what's the best and where we should be going. And we're always trying to look for the best and brightest things out there. One of the companies that I'd like to work with and maybe get one of their representatives on board is from Europe, and they'll talk more about how hydrogen is being used in Europe in a similar model to what we talked about here with Hawaiian Electric, where in Europe they have a pretty extensive electric grid and a pretty extensive gas grid, natural gas grid. And what they do is they've actually loaded up their renewable portfolio with a lot of wind power and solar power, and they need to do something with all the extra power that they generate. So they do generate hydrogen, and what they do in Europe is they pump it into their pipeline, their gas pipeline, to move it around the continent. That way you're not trucking fuel in any place. You're just basically moving it in a gas pipeline. So that would be really interesting for a future show. What I'd like to do is close up the session with a short video that's about an event coming up this September, and I'd like to let the video speak for itself. So there you go, coming up in September, World Conservation Congress. Be there. And coming up later this month is the Verge Conference, put on by the State Energy Office at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, and that comes up about the third week of June. Another great venue to look at energy and sustainability in Hawaii. So I'd like to thank you for being with us and working with us and watching and being good, faithful, all six of you out there. And looking at us here at Stan the Energy Man and just trying to stay up to speed with what's going on in the energy and transportation world. So until next week on my lunch hour, we'll see you next week Friday, Stan the Energy Man and Representative Chris Lee, and we'll get some more great scoops from the legislature and look forward to what's happening next year. Aloha.